Hi all, Marina Kukla here to discuss cognitive behavioral therapy for work success, CBTw, session 4, which is using the 4 A's to enhance healthy thinking. So we've kind of set the stage with our sessions 1 through 3. We've explored work goals, a work story, values and meaning tied to work. We introduced the CBT model and the CBT model as it relates to work. And then we went through in session 3 a different way to think about thoughts as not only positive or negative, but as helpful or unhelpful, healthy or unhealthy, and accurate or inaccurate. We also introduced the idea of mistakes in thinking or cognitive distortions, which are these common patterns that we all tend to fall in here or there, but those are the types of thinking that we want to address. So now in session 4, we're building on that and we're introducing the primary framework that we use here in CBTW, which is the 4 A's to enhance our healthy, helpful, and accurate thinking about work. And so then, of course, today we introduce the 4 A's. We go step by step. We start with our first A, which is being aware of that thinking. And so we also suggest there's a few ways that people can do that. So they might notice when their mood changes, notice uncomfortable feelings in their body, and notice what's happening in a difficult situation. There might be lots of other ways that people might be able to hone in on that unhealthy thinking, but these are some things to think about. Of course, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Before we jump into the content, we go through our agenda. We start with our work check-in, and we have every single veteran present check in, even if their check-in is no updates or nothing new. And then we also review the homework from session 3, which was to place our thoughts within this healthy, helpful, and accurate framework and sort of begin to notice our thoughts more. Okay, so now we've done all of those things. We've given people a chance to share their homework if they would like. We have everyone check in on their work. And we have gone through this 3 bullet point agenda here on page 32. Now we're reviewing how to be aware. You might have veterans read through this, or you might read through this first one yourself. And then we would take a minute or two to discuss as a group what are some other ideas that they have found helpful or it might make sense to become more aware or notice their thoughts more often. For some veterans, this will be easy. They may already be very aware and reflective of their own thoughts. For other people, this might be tremendously difficult. They may not be able to do this, and that's okay. There are other elements of the 4 A's they will be able to do. So we just begin to start helping people notice their thoughts, notice what might go through their head at various times. And as facilitators, we can use our primary technique of reflecting those thoughts to help people work through that process. So a lot of times veterans share a number of thoughts, or they share experiences or scenarios, they share narratives, and they might mention a thought, but they won't mention it as a thought. So in other words, they might say, I was really pissed when my boss, scolded me that way or came at me like that. That's a thought. And so that would be something that we could reflect. Or they might say, I had an interview and I thought it went well. And then I got a call, I didn't get the job. And so there are a number of thoughts they might have had right at that moment. I thought it went well, but I didn't get the job. That's confusing. Those are thoughts. The thoughts that we want to hone in and use for the 4 A's tend to be things that we want to answer, things that we want to change, the unhealthy, unhelpful, and inaccurate thoughts that are getting in our way and tripping us up. So those are the things that we try to focus on here. And those are the things that, as a facilitator, you might start to reflect a little bit more to veterans and focus in on, again, from our facilitator guide, using those thinking words, and focus on directly using the first person and sort of almost saying it in their own words and reflecting it right back to. And I have some examples here that are not in their own words, but they're examples of how you might reflect. And so someone who says, I had an interview and thought it went well, and I thought I was going to get the job and then I didn't, you could just reflect and you feel kind of disappointed. And now you're saying to yourself, I wonder what happened. Or perhaps they've said, oh man, I must have messed it up again this time. And so you could reflect that back, is that you're wondering if you were the reason that you did something wrong, or they might say it's because I'm too old. Again, here's another employer who's passing me up, another job I've lost out on. And you're saying to yourself, I'm too old to work, or employers are also always going to look at me that way. So you can see how we can go from these reflections to the things that we would directly sort of start to assess and we can use in our 4A's examples too. This also really helps with that. Once we've come up with one, we've identified one from a veteran and group, we can use that in our examples. So you start by going through the first A, aware, and the group kind of comes together and just discusses what might be some other ways. You could write them in the book here, or if we're doing this virtually, you would just discuss it as a group. And then you could go through the next A, which is really 2 A's, but we combine it into 1A, which is to assess that thinking. This is where we kind of draw upon what we went over in session 3. Is this thought accurate? Is it helpful? Is it healthy? And so one way I like to think about this assessment piece is this thought helping us with our goals? If it's clearly not, or it's clearly at odds with what our goal is, then one might say that that's probably a thought that we should answer. And sometimes people will, of course, disagree or have mixed opinions on whether these things are accurate, helpful, or healthy. But usually we can decide on one of these is off, one of these is not right. And so whether it's just unhelpful because our goal is to get a job and this thought makes us less motivated or more ambivalent or less likely to do that, or it's unhealthy because we're kind of beating ourselves up, we're not accepting of ourselves, we're maybe saying things that would harm our self-esteem or just be negative about how we feel towards ourselves, that's unhealthy. And then same thing with accurate or inaccurate. Sometimes things are just inaccurate and that's what's really getting in our way. So does it help us with our work goal? Does it make us feel good about ourselves or bad about ourselves? And is this just so inaccurate and out of kind of step with reality that it's really harming us? So those are 3 ways that I like to use when I'm thinking about assessment and I'm thinking about these sort of questions. And then that makes it easier to pick up on or hone in on a thought that requires answering. And so that's the second part of this A. And so now you've had veterans read through this, read aloud, or you've read aloud. I would suggest this is a great way to further engage veterans, even veterans who may not share a lot or talk a lot in group, is to ask them if they would like to read. Most people like to do it. And so I would continue to suggest that you use that as a way to engage people. I like to go through this very slowly at first because this is the very first introduction to it and we wouldn't expect that veterans would have the hang of this. And so I would go through it very slowly. You can even go through it slowly and have an example that you're using. We have some examples here. So of assess thinking, I'll never do anything right, I'll always be a loser is not healthy, helpful, or accurate. We have examples of answer thoughts here in the book. A good answer thought to the above would be, I made a mistake this time, but I'll do better next time. I'll continue to try and learn at work. So this example thread goes throughout these 4 A's. And it starts kind of up here. So the third A is what a lot of our intervention focuses on, which is actually to act to support that healthier, more helpful, and more accurate thinking about work, and to behave in a way that leads to success. So we have all of these sessions beginning next week in session 5 on ways that you can act to support success and to address the things that need to be addressed. And so these can be very concrete actions like working with your voc rehab specialist or getting interview clothes or updating your resume, or it can be things like how addressing that unhealthy thinking or how to manage yourself at work emotionally. And so that's why we do things like relaxation and breathing and things like this. It could be things like taking care of yourself and doing those pleasant activities that we talk about. So ACT is really broad and it's specific to each person, but we are this week introducing the basic element of what this means. And so you will then have a veteran, or you yourself as facilitator will read through this. In the above example, a positive manner to act would be to ask your supervisor for direction or assistance with the problem you're encountering, rather than just mentally beating yourself up over it, over making a small mistake or not, or being unsure how to do something. And then we have our fourth and final A, which is accept. So this is just being accepting of ourselves, that we're of value, and that we can have success. So a lot of times this is just being nice to ourselves and acting in a self-compassionate way. I like to think of acceptance along the lines of self-compassion, and that might be something you could think about. So you've had them read through acting, you went through this example here, you've done it slowly so that people can follow along. You're also beginning to assess if people are able to follow along, or if you need to slow down even further or provide some support or scaffolding to explain these concepts. You may not, everyone might get it, and in which case you've moved on to step 4, accept, and you've read through that. Now we have here on 36, we have um, our full list of our steps. And I like to go through these again, even though you've already gone through it, because this is brand new for everyone and we wouldn't expect that they would get it by now. And I would say a lot of times when I get to the bottom and I say, okay, let's go through an example, sometimes I'll get some blank looks from people and I can tell they're not quite getting it. It's also a lot of material. And so I wouldn't expect, if I've learned this 4-step process, that I would have it mastered. And so that's where the group example can really be helpful. Hopefully this is something that you have come up with in advance, or something that you can come up with on the fly. I like using the fillable PDFs for this, and I like having an example and a blank one in case I need to use my own example. If you have a really good one for group, especially one that has already been identified, something a veteran may be experiencing, or something that's very common, a common thread across the veterans that you're working with, or maybe a few of them, you could use that. I try to use something as an example that I know people can relate to. And so those are really good ones to use here. I think you can do it on the fly using a veteran's example from group, but it's a little bit harder. What I like to do is I like to walk step by step through each of these. If you do it on the fly, which is fine, I like to get some feedback from the group. And so this is where people might differ on their opinion of that assessment. So is this healthy? Is this helpful? Is this accurate? I like to make sure we can hone on one of them that's off, and say, okay, like maybe this is unhelpful if it doesn't help us with our work goals, or it seems to be against them. So let's go ahead and look at this. Usually too, with step 1, you want to be sure that you very clearly identify what the thought is and the scenario. The scenario leads to the thought leads to the assessment, and all of the other A's. So if you can really clearly delineate the scenario and then really clearly operationalize the thought here, just clearly say what it is. So, and not confuse the two of these. So the example I gave, the guy goes to the interview, he thinks it went well, and then he gets the call that he unfortunately did not get the job. So you could have a lot of thoughts there. And I can imagine myself that I would have a lot of thoughts as well. So, one thought you could have is, oh man, I've failed again. I'm never going to get a job. Or it could be, screw those people. I'm never going to apply at their company again. Or it could be something like, oh, I'm too old. He clearly didn't want to hire me because I'm 65. So I think those are 3 valid thoughts. Probably the first thought or the third thought would be the ones that I would use here as an example. Thinking I'm never going to get a job is clearly unhelpful. And it would be something we would want to address with the 4 A's. Saying to yourself, well, I'm too old to get a job. Here we go again with someone not giving me an opportunity due to age. That would be another one that we would want to address. The second one, like maybe we would. So I'm never going to apply there again. Screw these people. That is a thought. Maybe it's sort of a planned behavior too, but it's probably one that we're less worried about than the first and the third, which seem more harmful and problematic. So we would very clearly write that out on these in this space here after we've laid out the scenario, which is had the interview, thought it went well, sitting at home, you get the call that you didn't get the job. So it's in the moment, it's very specific, the scenario. Then we go through aware. You would also ask, what were your feelings? Well, I was disappointed, I was angry, I was felt kind of depressed. What were your bodily reactions? I got a headache, my muscles kind of clenched up, my stomach was hurting. How did you behave? Well, I went out to chain smoke, I was really upset, or I went and had a drink, or I talked to my spouse about it, or I threw my resume in the trash. So there could be a number of things. So you would go through each of these. You lay out the thought, then the emotions, then any bodily reactions and behaviors. Then you go through the assessment, which we've kind of gone over that quite a bit. And then you go through the answer. So if you're picking it as a thought to use as an example, it's always one that we're going to want to answer. And so usually, sometimes I'll come up with the first answer thought, and I'll encourage the group to do the same. Pretty much anything they come up with, unless it's way out of left field or not an answer thought because it's negative or critical or unhelpful, unhealthy, or very inaccurate. Anything they come up with, I say, that's great, let's write that down. And so even though maybe it's not the perfect answer thought that I would use, I really try to reinforce them engaging in the material and trying to do this and starting to think more deeply about this. And so that's why I really try to get anything I can out of them and use that as an answer thought. I also, as I said, weaved within there, though, kind of come up with my own answer thoughts too. And then number 3, same thing with ACT. Anything they come up with that seems healthy, like apply to more jobs, or went out for a walk and didn't chain smoke, or anything that's remotely in the realm of reasonable, here I do the same thing. I write it down for ACT. I also come up with my own ideas. We take it, I try to ask the group to come in and give us their example. So everyone's kind of throwing out their own thoughts about this and kind of doing that group together thing. And then accept here, too, I usually come up with the first accept thought, which is that, like in this example, I'm worthy of a job. Anybody would be lucky to have me, or I can get a job. I'm going to keep trying hard. I know I can do a good job. So any acceptance thought, I usually do the first couple myself to give them an example of what accept would look like in this instance. But then you might ask them, do you have one? If it's a specific person who has this as his example or her example, I usually ask them in this case. So I, of course, want to take anything that I can from the rest of the group if somebody else has a good accept thought. But I also ask that individual. So in this case, the individual who had the letdown with the job interview and all of that. So now you've gone through as a group. I would take a few minutes and have them jot down their own example. This is not something we always have time to do, but I would strongly encourage you to do it. It's really, really important for their learning and their use of this material, and to be able to integrate it and start using it in their lives. So I would take as much time as you have, because this is the last thing, the rest of the session, and then hopefully you have a couple minutes to go over at least one person's example. What's going to happen is a lot of people aren't going to quite get it yet, and that's okay. Maybe they'll just write down some notes, and that's all right. Anything that they write down is good. And we just want to start. We go through the 4As so much in CBTw. This is our first crack at it. So we don't have to worry so much about perfection or that everyone gets it, because some people just aren't going to be able to do this. But maybe they can come up with some ACT steps. Maybe they can't do thoughts. Maybe they are not reflective, or they don't have insight on their thoughts, or they don't have that capacity. That's okay. They can do ACT and come up with some healthy steps for them, or some effective steps for them that make sense to them. And maybe they can just do like some general accept things. So I think most people can do this also with our help. That's where allowing them time to go through their examples helps us see where they are. we're not in person if it's virtual group, so we can't go around and see what they've written and help them that way. So the only way to know if they're getting it is to allow them time and space to share theirs, and and then to provide some, you know, gentle and appropriate feedback on, you know, that's great, great try. You know, I think you said a lot of important things here. Let's go through it step by step and see what we can come up with. So I always try to encourage people as much as possible for even trying this, and anything they've done that's remotely in the realm of this is great. So as facilitators, we don't have to feel like everyone has to get it this week. They're going to have lots of opportunities to continue learning and using this. And then the homework then is to review the 4As and start to become aware. So I would say that our early focus is really on the first couple of A's: aware, assess, and then we start to look at answer more. But if they can be more aware and then start to assess those thoughts, then we can get to the answer and the act pieces and the accept. So really focusing on the first couple of A's is important. Same thing with your technique. So we're using cognitive reflection or thought reflection. We don't have to worry as much about answer yet. I know the homework is to write down your answer thoughts, and that's fine. But I think early on, we're still not to the point where people are going to be little answer thought generators. So we want to be understanding of that. We're really trying to emphasize the first two A's, and then we can get to answer and act and accept. So we want them to be aware and start to assess that thinking. That's really what we're focusing on. And similarly with your cognitive reflections, it should be at that level. Answer thoughts are fine, and we can start to creep those in and start to include them as we go on. But we want to really focus on the first two. We have lots of opportunities for ACT and focusing on those steps in the upcoming sessions. But now we're at the point where we can start building in more of this reflection at a place that makes sense for the individual veteran and that they can understand. Of course, if you have someone who isn't very aware of their thoughts, then the most basic cognitive reflection is most appropriate. If you have someone who can already answer their thoughts, then that level of cognitive reflection is appropriate, and highlighting and identifying those answer thoughts with them and for them is appropriate. So this is the stage at which having that case conceptualization that's been building and that will continue to build, and acting based on that as a facilitator is important, as well as the overall arc of the group and sort of where people are in general. So these are my thoughts on session 4. This is one of the most important sessions that we have because it introduced our 4As framework. Hope it goes well. Thanks for watching this video.